So I feel like we really need to talk about Sam Harris. And the reason we need to talk about it is because he does a great job of balancing philosophy and science. So a lot of my videos are pitting science against philosophy or philosophy against science, talking about scientism and the language games and all of this. And I think what's necessary here is to use Sam Harris as an example of somebody who is trained in science, has a PhD in cognitive neuroscience, and yet is capable of philosophy. And so talking a little bit about what Sam Harris does will help us. And so I'm going to go over these high points for Harris. We're going to talk about emergence theory. We're going to talk about the hard problem, David Chalmers' hard problem, even though it's kind of everyone's problem. We're going to talk about ideas of the self, uh, ideas about panpsychism, and I'm going to end it with antenna theory, the receiver theory. That's, yes, I'm going to explain it. So, does he believe in emergence? Yes, he calls himself a hard determinist. He seems to be on the side of determinism most of the time. What does this mean for philosophy? It means if you're a philosopher and you take a stance in a hard determinist stance, you work out the other side. You work out what it would be like if emergence wasn't the thing. So emergence just means what's important is brain. This is the best way to understand it. It's what's relevant and what's important and what's measurable is brain. Your mental life, all of your cognitive life is just a byproduct. It is just a reflection of that physical activity. It's not something in itself. It's not something to talk about. So the emergence is how we get that experience, that subjective experience from the activity in the brain. So Harris does explore this. This is a great example of Sam Harris breaching these two disciplines, or at least serving as an example of that breach. And so what he wants to say is he does not have an answer for the hard problem. He can still be a hard determinist, but not have the problem worked out. So what that means is it means two things. But the first thing is he understands the brain. He's saying because he's a hard determinism that consciousness comes from the brain, but he doesn't know how. And so that's the hard problem. That the hard problem is not saying you have to definitively show the physical material side of what it actually means phenomenologically, which means a thing in itself, kind of. Um, what he's saying is that there's a huge mystery here how we have subjective experience and how we have this mental life um, as it is an emergent property of physical, of the brain. And so he's not trying to jump to the conclusion that he understands it all. He's just saying to him that's where it comes from. The other thing is that he says he's open to the idea, and I'm going to get to that in the panpsychism one. He's open to the idea that there's more to it and that you will find this direction problem. So hard determinists go from brain to mind. Other people, including panpsychists, go from something else back to brain, which means brain is the product. We'll talk about that in uh, receiver theory. So the second one, the second one is the hard problem, and I talked about that already. The third one is the idea of the self, and this is where I think Harris falls apart a little bit, and I do think he's being philosophical and attaching himself to scientific philosophy. So David Hume, 18th century, of course, we talk about this a lot, is big on the idea that self is an illusion. That means your experiences knit together as a kind of habit, like you experience it over and over again, and that habituation only is the feeling of self, not an actual self. If you call it a soul, transcendental self, or even what Harris calls it is a unified central thinker, which means something real to the idea of self, which I think in these incarnations transcends physicality. So the way we think of physicality. So when we think of the brain, that's one thing. It's got to be something else. And I think they would say it's not material. But the soul works. I've never liked the soul as a word or an idea any more than the God concept, but I do think that takes the place of it. So Harris says no. He agrees with Hume clearly as a philosopher because this is a philosophy question. There's no hard problem of the self. And I guess you could construct something, but I haven't seen it, where we have the physical explanation for self, and then we have a soul explanation or dualist explanation. I hope that makes sense. Because if you understand this stuff better, please chime in with the comments, especially with Sam Harris, because I'm confused, as I should be, with someone who expresses both science and philosophy correctly, because there's going to be these open questions. And so I think anyone who denies the self fails. I think Hume was a great example of this from start to finish. He brought out this idea about the self, the bundle of sensations, the habituation, making us think that the self is what he called an enduring, meaningful self. He thinks it's not true, but in the appendix to the treatise, I talk about this a lot. Hume admits that he can't reconcile his own theory. And some people play this down and say, well, Hume was just throwing in some humility, maybe. No, Hume understand, like I understand, that there is more to this debate. He comes from a period where philosophy was definitely predominant um, and rounded out so that it's unescapable for a real thinker. And that philosophy, like it does with Harris, leads him to these alternate ideas, this questioning of your own concepts, the self-analysis. And for Hume, it was, I cannot reconcile my experience of self with my own statements about how they're illusory. So panpsychism is another one for Harris. Super interesting. Panpsychism, I won't leave you guys hanging. It does mean everything is mind. I've never understood panpsychism. I don't like it. I like it when people make fun of it. People dismiss it. A lot of scientists, I think Sean Carroll is one of them, a physicist who says, well, the silliness. It might not be him, though. I've done so many videos on um, hard determinist physicists and neuroscientists. Panpsychism means, more importantly, if you're trying to learn this stuff, panpsychism means that the mind is more fundamental than physicality. It just means when you're looking at these things, what is the most fundamental? What is the deeper structure? And the deeper structure is mental for panpsychism, which would support the next theory that I'm going to talk about. So Sam Harris said he's open to panpsychism. Got to remember, Harris graduated with the BA in philosophy, was interested. Prior to it, he was trying to get a BA in English, like me, and got sick of it, like me. And he ventured out for 11 years and traveled around learning Eastern religions. So when he approaches panpsychism and philosophy in general, I think it's almost like going to a school of a race that's different than your own race, like I did. And after years and years of doing that, you become a little blinded to the problem. You don't have the problem that other people have that are more homogenous in their upbringing. And when you go to the East, I think you start to become just naturally more philosophically and open-minded, just like you would with race, just like I did in all these things. I'm not saying I'm Sam Harris. I think I'm much better looking, but that's a completely separate issue. We're the same age, but I'm taller, which is always the case. So panpsychism, he's open to it. His wife wrote a book on it. His wife seems more open than he is. Anyone knows anything about marriage, if your wife's open to it, you better be open to it. I think, again, this open to the panpsychism would cause him, especially as a hard determinist, to really make a lot of changes before he was willing to accept it. And I also think he's just being open-minded, which is great. So antenna theory, receiver theory means, again, that the direction of value and meaning goes instead from brain to mind, from something else back to mind, to brain. This is so confusing. So basically, it means determinism means the meaning is in brain. The kind of not meaningless, but the illusion, feeling, subjective experience is not important. It is a byproduct. So in uh, antenna theory, you could believe in panpsychism or analytic idealism. We talked about that in a further video, which means there's one central consciousness. And so your brain is a receiver, like a almost almost like a radio receiver. That I think that was one of the analogies, and it picks up the sound waves coming from the central consciousness, and your individual consciousness is then the sound. And these are analogies. So in the receiver theory, you have not panpsychism, which means everything has consciousness in it. Those are the fundamental atoms. Analytic idealism means there's a central consciousness which is in some sense a power. It's a fundamental power, but it's like a god. That's one way to do it. And your receiver is your brain, and this explains the problem Sam Harris has with um, with the original thing was, which is emergence. Sam Harris's idea is that when you split the brain, you can get two separate consciousnesses. And if you damage the brain, you get a damaged mental experience. And this is very common. Sam Harris is very aware of this as a philosopher and a scientist. As a scientist, he understands the brain. As a philosopher, he understands, I think that this is the best explanation and this is a rational way to approach this. And I like that idea. But when you plug in antenna theory and receiver theory, it turns that on its head. And that's why Harris would not like receiver theory. Um, and I think he supports it too. And I'm trying to give him credit here. But it is true that he would be not receptive to either one. And so the receiver theory turns it on its head because if you damage the receiver, the radio um, receiver that takes in those sound waves, it's damaged. You're going to get a damaged sound, which is the consciousness. You're not going to be able to hear it. It's going to come out garbled. But the sound waves are still the same. It was damaged equipment. The receiver itself was damaged. And so I think with receiver theory or antenna theory, if you accept that metaphysics, which is a big word for me even after all these big words, if you accept it because it makes sense to you, it also explains and turns upside down this problem of emergence because there's no emerging, right? For whatever explanation, whether it's panpsychic or analytic idealism, what you have is an incoming product. Well, it's not going to be a sound wave like it would in the analogy, but it's incoming. Your brain picks it up, it translates that or categorizes it or makes it perfect for our species, or picks it up and broadcasts it really well, or just more loudly, or whatever. But if you damage the speaker itself, which is to say, break it in half, or introduce a chemical substance, or have brain damage from an accident, if these things happen, your mental picture is going to be disrupted, but the incoming material is fine, just like the sound waves were. So antenna theory does play out in philosophy, not in science. There's no way to test this right now. And so in philosophy, which most of this is philosophy anyway, which is my point about Sam Harris, my point about the debate, my point about most people not appreciating juggling the two things. You know, you in a rote sense know a little bit about science, and then you process it philosophically. Sam Harris, of course, is a PhD in hard science, and so he has as much as he can get there. He's struggling with the BA in philosophy to put these things together, and I think again, comment if you understand it better. I think he is being open-minded, which is the right way to do it, and not coming away with as much of what I would call kind of the intuitive feeling of philosophy when you get more experienced with it. That I've said this in so many times, this is a brand new thing. I'm gonna get in so much trouble for this, but I think people that are really, really experienced have really similar ideas about things that are somewhat intuitive that make them have a negative response to things. And again, this is going to be some kind of vulgar common sense. But for example, when people say no free will, there's a good number of people like me that just go, yeah, no. Like, yeah, just like Ayn Rand did. Ayn Rand said, yeah, no. And there were a lot of people that had this issue. Thomas Reid, 18th century, when Hume said this stuff about illusions, said this stuff about habituation only, said this stuff about radical skeptical empiricism and developed that. Reid's reaction was, what does this do to what he called agency? And of course, what that means is free will. And he went, no. Yeah, Presbyterian minister, I get it. Um, and and I know that's true, but at the same time, I really believe Reid was divorcing religion from um, the the method of philosophy for himself, and he was a scientist more so than Sam Harris for his day. So that's Sam Harris. Comment if you've got some more to say about some of these debates he has. These four theories: emergence, heart problem, the self, panpsychism, and antenna theory. I think that's like 4.5. if you have opinions on that and have a better understanding of where Harris stands on it and what kind of example he sets for that, I got to end this video. I hope it's a long one. I hope it's a good one. I hope it gets some watch hours. Thanks for coming. And I'm starving to death doing this shit. I'm not kidding when I say that. Get me a buffet. Bye.